In 1864, a Tennessee orphanage sealed the death record of a boy named Abram Harmon. Few weeks after the burial, a child arrived under the name Elias, but his scar matched the one documented on Abram. A routine dental exam showed 2 sets of notes for the same child, but recorded a week apart. Staff members recovered a letter signed by both twins, yet handwriting analysis confirmed it was written by the same child at 2 different times. When teachers called him by either name, the boy responded. He never corrected them. If the death was documented, why did the surviving child match the reports of the dead boy? And why did teachers keep referring to him as if both were still present? Drop a comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more undocumented cases. The boy arrived at dusk, accompanied by a deputy from the 6th District and a note handwritten by a widow in Smith County. His face was dirty but calm, hair trimmed unevenly at the sides, knuckles scraped raw, no luggage, no papers. The deputy signed him over with a half-legible scribble and excused himself before the boy could ask any questions. The matron on duty was Miss Fielder, a 30-year veteran of the home. She consulted the intake schedule, expecting to place the child in one of the overflow cots in the infirmary annex, but the register had already assigned him bed 3L, west wing, main floor, despite his name not being logged yet. She paused. The west wing had no recent openings. Bed 3L had only just been vacated earlier that week, following the quiet death of a boy named Lawson, age 11. But when she entered the room, the bed was already made. Not just made. Prepared. The sheets were fresh, tight corners, blanket turned down. A folded nightshirt sat atop the pillow, bleached, still warm from pressing. A small linen tag was stitched into the seam of the blanket, a single red initial. A. Fielder returned to the registry and asked who had assigned the cot. Miss Greaves, the clerk, looked up from the intake ledgers, puzzled. That cot was prepped 2 days ago. We had it down for a child named Abram. Abram's the dead one, Fielder replied. Greaves double-checked. Then it must be a carryover entry. Still, that bed was logged and prepped on the 18th. Fielder flipped back through the linen charts. The log matched. 3L. Sheets pressed. AH tag. Set for child intake. The boy was led into the room quietly. He sat at the edge of the bed without hesitation, folding his hands neatly in his lap. When Fielder asked for his name, he hesitated. Say your name clearly for the intake file, she repeated. He looked at the stitched letter on the blanket, then at the clipboard, then said softly, Abram. Fielder raised an eyebrow. Elias, she corrected him. Your name is Elias. You're the one who stayed. The boy didn't argue. He nodded, but didn't repeat the name. Greaves updated the intake file by hand, writing Elias H. in the new ledger. She scratched out the 3L assignment in the schedule margins and relabeled the cot with a fresh tag. EH, this time done in ink. That night, when linen was collected for rotation, the original blanket with A stitched into the seam had gone missing. The laundry attendants denied misplacing it. They'd never seen it come through their morning basket. It wasn't in the wash queue, nor in the discard heap. The ink-labeled EH blanket was in place on the bed by inspection. No one could recall switching it. Miss Fielder filed a note under Elias's intake entry. Initial confusion regarding cot assignment. Mislabeled linen. Subject briefly identified as Abram during verbal confirmation. No objection to correction. Behavior calm, compliant. No belongings. No signature Y. Et taken. That final line became an issue the next morning. A junior clerk noticed that Elias's intake form had been filed without a signature. The space was blank. Not just unsigned, but never touched. No pressure marks, no ink smudges. Just an empty line beneath the printed name, Elias Harmon. By then, the child had already been added to the breakfast roster, and the original AH entry, cot 3L, stitched, logged and folded, was gone from the linen book. The page had been torn. The date still showed clearly in the margin, July 18th, 1864. but the name field had been ripped clean through. The orphanage's death ledger was kept in the basement record room, beneath a glass-fronted case mounted to the rear wall. Bound in rough calfskin and updated weekly, the book contained every name of every child who had died under the institution's care since 1839. Each entry followed a strict format: name, date of death, age, cause, initials of confirming staff. Abram Harmon had been added to the ledger 8 weeks prior. The entry was logged in Miss Greaves's hand. Harmon, Abram, June suit, 1864. Age 8, fever complications. Witness, Fielder, M. The handwriting was neat. The ink had dried fully. No one questioned it. On July 20th, during the routine quarterly audit, staff cross-checked names from the death ledger against the active resident roll. That morning, they found both Elias and Abram Harmon listed under current residents, main wing, bed 3L and 3R, initials EH and AH. Both marked present for breakfast on July 19th. Both marked absent for chapel, though the attendance slip showed a single boy from their row had been present. Fielder blamed a clerical oversight. The summer volunteer staff had been disorganized, several names scratched out, others repeated or abbreviated. She marked a red X through AH and initialed beside it. The entry would be updated in the afternoon. At 3:45 p.m., while returning the revised register to the office shelf, a clerk named Mira Dunn noticed something odd. Abram Harmon's name had been re-entered, same row, same bed, no red mark. The ink was wet. She called in Greaves. Together they pulled the ledger and reviewed the audit log. Fielder's red X was present in the corner margin, but not beside Abram's name. That name had no trace of earlier removal. It hadn't been scratched, erased, or rewritten. It had simply been there. Greaves summoned Dunn to explain. The girl swore she hadn't touched the book after lunch. She'd been resorting donation records in the annex hall since 2 p.m. When asked if she was certain she hadn't recopied the names from memory, she looked confused. "There were 2 Harmon boys in the morning log," she said. "Why would I remove one?" Greaves produced the death ledger. "One of them is dead, Miss Dunn." The girl didn't reply. She stared at the open book, then at the bed roster, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded note. Reminder, bed 3R linen to be rotated. AH. Grey blanket, closet bin, initialed in her own hand. The problem was that bed 3R was supposed to be unassigned. That bed had been closed off after the fire in April. Only 3L was reopened for Elias. Greaves excused the girl and logged the note into the discrepancy folder. She then returned to the death ledger and compared Abram's name against the previous entries. The line spacing was off. Abram's name sat just slightly lower than the names above and below it, by less than a millimeter, but enough to shift the page rhythm. Greaves ran her finger along the edge of the parchment. The fibers there were different, newer, lightly stiff. She lifted the corner with a letter opener. A thin, nearly seamless patch had been glued over the prior section, and the name rewritten cleanly. Someone had reinserted the boy, not erased him, not forgotten, but placed him back, deliberately, and smoothed the record to match. The original entry with the red X remained, but now sat a page liar in the sequence, as if it had aged backward. Greaves flagged the volume for review and submitted a report to the director's office. The next morning, a different clerk was found copying both twins' names into the dinner rotation. When asked why, she answered plainly, "They're on the same shift again." But only one tray had been requested. The physician's examination took place 3 days after Elias's admission, scheduled during the weekly medical rotation for new arrivals. The boy was quiet throughout, compliant, steady-eyed, gave no resistance when instructed to remove his shirt. Dr. Corwin, who had served the institution for over a decade, worked from a fixed set of intake forms: height, weight, vision, reflex, notes on previous injuries, malnourishment indicators, infection risk. He followed it precisely, as always. It wasn't until the boy leaned forward for spinal curvature assessment that the scar was noticed. A clean line, faint, but clearly surgical. 6 inches in length, running diagonally below the left shoulder blade toward the spine. He paused, set down his instrument and asked, "When did this happen?" The boy gave no answer. Corwin looked to Miss Fielder, who stood at the doorway with the intake file. She shook her head. There was no mention of a prior procedure, no reports from the sending party in Smith County, no illness notes. Corwin lifted the form and flipped through the older documents from their archives. The Harmon twins had been registered under parish watch, but no doctor had seen them since late May. The only recorded injury on file was a broken finger on Abram, sustained during a fall from a cellar step. Corwin examined the scar again. "This wasn't a fall," he said. "This was cleaned, sutured." He pressed lightly along the edge of the scar. "It's at least 6 months old." Fielder scanned the intake sheets again. "He's never had surgery, not under our care." Corwin frowned. "No," he said, "but the other one, Abram, he had a chest wound during the influenza last year, drained. Fluid buildup. I remember stitching it, thought he'd die of it." She looked down at the chart. "That isn't in here." "It wouldn't be. I treated him off the books. The records were full that winter. Half the children were on the floor." I added a short note to Abram's personal file. He left the room. The boy sat motionless as the door closed. He hadn't looked up once. 10 minutes later, Corwin returned, file in hand. He flipped through until he found the marginalia, scrawled beside a temperature log. Abram. Left side thoracic drainage, small incision. Monitored 48 hours. Sutures, internal. He held the note next to Elias's exposed back. "This is the same placement." Fielder looked at the note again. "But Elias wasn't ill." "He wasn't treated here," Corwin said. "Abram was." Corwin made a note in pencil at the bottom of Elias's intake page. "Scar present. Origin unknown. Matches procedure performed on twin brother. Deceased. No documentation under current subject." That evening, the boy's file was pulled again during nightly rounds. The scar notation had been underlined by an unknown hand. Another page had been slipped into the folder, dated incorrectly, March 12, 1864, and written in different ink. It read, "Fluid removed, left thoracic. Aber. Harmon, age 8. Recovery noted. Cot 3L reassigned to well twin." Greaves, called in to assess the page, held it up to the light. The handwriting resembled Corwin's, but the signature was missing. The date didn't match any recorded rotation. "What's Cot 3L doing in this?" she asked. That cot wasn't assigned to either of them in March. She checked the linen log again. Cot 3L had been marked vacant until June. The notation disappeared from Elias's folder by morning. The page was gone. Only the pencil note remained, but the phrasing had changed. Corwin's note had originally ended with, "No documentation under current subject." Now it read, "Scheme. Are present. Documentation consistent." On the second Monday of Elias's placement, he was assigned to Classroom B, Main Hall, East Wing, for phonics and writing lessons with the younger residents. The children sat in rows of 7, benches tight to the wall. Chalk slates were handed out, and a new series of vowels introduced. Miss Avery instructed the class to repeat sounds as she wrote them on the board. Elias did not speak. He copied the characters cleanly. His writing was precise, more advanced than expected for his age, but his mouth remained shut during recitation. Near the end of the lesson, Miss Avery observed him mouthing something not on the board, not vowel sounds, a name, just under his breath. She walked behind his bench, listening carefully. "Micah." She waited. He repeated it again, slower. "Micah." There was no student by that name in his group. No one seated nearby reacted. Miss Avery tapped the slate in front of him and asked who he was speaking to. The boy paused, then shrugged. "I saw him earlier," he said, "in the wood hall." "The wood hall's closed," she replied. He didn't correct her. Miss Avery dismissed the class and stayed behind to file her report. The Wood Hall was a common nickname among the children for the South Annex, a narrow corridor that had been sealed off in April following structural damage from the spring thaw. No children were permitted beyond the rope line. The floorboards had bowed. One of the doors no longer latched. She brought the matter to Miss Fielder that afternoon. The boy had spoken the name twice, calmly, as if referring to someone current, someone he'd just seen. Fielder searched the active roll. No Micah listed. She checked back 6 months. Nothing. Then she went to the archived rosters, organized by reading group, intake year and wing assignment. Group C, spring term, March 1864. Instructor, H.J. Holloway. 8 students. One name highlighted in red, Micah. Bell, withdrawn, April 6th. Family relocation. The withdrawal was not unusual. Several families had reclaimed children that month due to the wartime food shortages, but Holloway's notes included a specific remark. Paired with Abram Harmon for reading rotation, good progress, strong mimicry, minimal verbal participation. Fielder pulled Abram's withdrawn file and cross-referenced the entries. Micah Bell's name was listed once, next to a reading assignment, a dog-eared corner with their initials written together. E.H. and M.B. did not appear in any of Elias's materials. Later that evening, Fielder asked Elias again about the name. "Where did you hear Micah?" He replied without looking up. "He was on the bench across from mine." "Which bench?" "In the Wood Hall." The benches in the South Annex had been removed months ago. The wing had not been used since spring. The chalkboard had been unmounted and the windows boarded. She pressed further. "What did you two talk about?" The boy shrugged. "He asked if I was feeling better." Fielder logged the conversation and pulled the annex room logs. A cleaning record from July 2nd, 2 weeks before Elias's intake, listed all furnishings removed. 10 benches, chalkboard frame, window coverings, all accounted for. But beneath that list, a handwritten addition in faded graphite. One slate left in back desk. Initials, M.B. The slate had not been retrieved. Fielder returned to the annex with the key the following morning. The air inside was stale. Dust pooled along the window seams. No desks remained, no benches. The rope across the corridor had not been disturbed. On the floor in the far corner sat a slate, split at the top edge, half covered in dust. Wiped clear, the initials still showed faintly in chalk. M.B. There was no official reason to keep the slate. It was placed in storage, filed under MISKI, abandoned classroom materials. No one ever asked Elias about the name again, and he never said it again. But when seated in classroom rows, he always left space across from himself, 1 slate's width wide. Elias was pulled from handwriting practice just after second bell, sent down to the infirmary for the quarterly dental inspection. The process was routine. Each child received a brief oral exam, a gum health rating, and a chart update. Most didn't require treatment. The objective was documentation, tracking hygiene, identifying emerging cases of rot, and logging developmental anomalies. Dr. Keene had performed these rotations for years. He used a simple steel probe and wax pencil. Each child's chart was hung on a clipboard outside the exam room door. Names alphabetized, check boxes for each tooth quadrant, space at the bottom for remarks. Elias entered the room without complaint. Keene noted that he opened his mouth immediately, with no verbal prompting. His teeth were clean, gums slightly pale, but even. No rot, no loosened molars, no sensitivity reported. The boy's file, retrieved from the top shelf, already contained 2 sheets. Keene paused. There weren't supposed to be 2. The first chart was marked with the date, July 24th, 1864. Name, Elias Harmon. Examiner, Dr. S. Keene. Observations. Upper right incisor late erupt. Molar 2 loose, non-abnormal. Advise recheck in 4 Vuiwe keys. Initials, SK. The second chart sat underneath. Same name, same date of birth, same assigned bed, 3L. but the exam date was July 17th, 1864. Examiner blank. Observations: upper right incisor not present, molar 2 fixed, cusp alignment unusual, no decay, no signature, just a small graphite mark in the corner, a diagonal line, unfinished. Keene called in the attending nurse, Miss Reed. "Did someone run an early dental on this child last week?" She checked. "The roster." "No, sir. You're the first to see him." "But this chart." Keene held up the unsigned form. "It has values different than what I'm seeing. The molar was noted as fixed. It's loose now." Reed frowned. "There was no survey last week. Only vaccinations. Dr. Whitley handled those." They checked the infirmary log. On July 17th, no dental procedures were recorded. Only 2 children had been seen that day, both for fever. Reed flipped the unsigned page over. On the back, in light pencil, were 2 letters, A-H, then a smudged number, 3R. Bed, 3R, had no occupant. Keene asked Elias if he had seen a dentist before today. The boy shook his head. "No." "Did someone look in your mouth last week?" "No." Keene pressed lightly against the loose molar. "Does that hurt?" The boy didn't respond, but he reached toward the tray on the exam table, picked up the small round mirror, and held it to the side of his face. He tilted it, as if checking something behind his teeth. "Have you done that before?" Keene asked. The boy said nothing. He placed the mirror down, upside down, then looked at the unsigned chart. Quietly, he said, "That one had different teeth." Keene filed the signed chart into the active cabinet. The unsigned one was held back for review. He marked it unverified source, possible misfile. That evening, when the cabinet was checked during routine lockup, both charts were present, identical in format, identical in name. But now both were dated July 24th, one signed, one unsigned. The molar status matched in both, loose. Only the handwriting remained different. Greaves entered a notation into the institutional log. Duplicate dental chart located. Discrepancy in dates resolved without explanation. Second chart unsourced. Retained for audit. Subject denies prior exam. Dr. Keene later added a private note to his medical diary. Child displayed accurate mirror use. Advanced. For age. Mentioned alternate dental state. No documentation supports prior inspection. Referred name unclear. The name wasn't noted in the official file, but Keene remembered what the boy said under his breath just once while staring into the mirror. Abram had straighter teeth. Laundry was collected every Thursday, brought in stacked wicker bins from each wing, and sorted in the south room by initials stitched into fabric corners. The practice helped prevent theft and confusion, especially among the younger boys, who often swapped cots or tore tags loose while roughhousing. Each blanket, shirt, and nightshirt bore either stamped ink or hand-sewn thread, depending on its age. That morning, Matron Corbin paused over a folded wool blanket pulled from the West Wing bin. The tag in the corner showed 2 initials, E.H., clearly visible, stitched in grey thread, tight and uniform. But just below the surface, slightly offset and dimmed by age, was a second set, A.H. Same thread color, same style, same spacing, not a replacement. A second set, slightly beneath the top layer, like a palimpsest in fabric. She turned the corner over and examined the seam. There was no break in the stitching, no indication the thread had been unpicked or rewoven. The blanket hadn't been tampered with, not in any visible way. She assumed a child had tried to overwrite a sibling's mark, or possibly stitched over someone else's item. She brought it to Miss Fielder and explained the confusion. Fielder held it up to the light. From that angle, both sets of initials appeared at once, neither fully dominant, a faint offset shadow where the A arced beneath the E. "Who was assigned this?" she asked. Corbin consulted the linen log. July 21st, bed 3L, wool blanket, EH tag, grey weave, reissued following laundering. 3L is Elias, Fielder confirmed. No one else's tag should be on this. They examined the linen inventory book for cross-reference. The original listing from June showed a reissued blanket tagged AH, following a bout of illness, likely Abro's. Am's final weeks. The note beside it had been struck through, re-inked to read EH, with no reason given for the correction. The staff initials beside the change were unreadable. Possibly G. Dunn. Possibly no one at all. That afternoon, the blanket was brought to the sewing room for closer inspection. Mrs. Dunning, who had overseen textile labeling for 9 years, laid it flat on her measuring board and picked at the thread with a magnifier. "There's no second stitching," she said. "This isn't an overwrite. It's woven." "We don't weave on site," Corbin reminded her. "I know. That's the problem." Dunning pointed to the curve of the A. It trailed beneath the E, but didn't dip in tension, didn't pull the fabric. It was part of the base layer, inserted during the initial manufacturing or possibly woven directly into the bolt before cutting. "This was stitched once," she said, "but both sets were there from the start." Later, the orphanage clerk pulled all blanket orders from the last 3 quarters. Only 6 items had dual initials. All were either marked with crossed-out names in the assignment ledger or returned for reissue following misplacement. All 6 had been tied to the Harmon twins at some point. 2 had been given to Abram. 3 were assigned to Elias after restitching. 1, the current item, had been logged as lost 2 weeks before Elias arrived. Corbin folded the blanket and brought it to the main office. She placed it on the director's desk with a note. "Initials overlap. Thread not altered. Reissue history unclear. Possible duplication during intake transition." The director marked it, "Internal matter, no action." By evening, the blanket had disappeared from the West Wing laundry shelf. In its place, folded and untagged, was a plain wool substitute. No label, no initials. When asked about it the next morning, Elias said only, "It's warm enough. I don't need mine anymore." He never asked for the stitched one back. No one asked him why he stopped folding it each morning. On Tuesday, the younger boys were given crayons and paper during their indoor hour due to rain. Miss Avery instructed them to draw their own dormitory, bedrows, windows, the hallway outside. The goal was to identify spatial understanding and fine motor consistency, as per the director's annual developmental review. Elias took a seat near the supply cabinet and selected 3 crayons, brown, grey, and pale blue. He worked silently for the full hour, keeping his elbows tight to the desk and turning the paper only once. When time was called, he handed in his drawing without comment. Miss Avery scanned the stack. Most were crude: boxes for beds, circular windows, stick-figure children. Elias's stood out immediately. His lines were deliberate, the proportions correct. 7 beds lined the left wall, evenly spaced. A low-burning oil lamp was sketched in the corner, and a door was drawn at the far end with a split in the center panel, accurate to the West Wing's old fire doors. Avery turned the paper over. No name. She asked Elias which room he'd drawn. He said without hesitation, "Where Abram used to sleep." "Which wing is this?" she asked. "The one with the wooden windows," he replied. "Before the fire." The West Wing had been closed 2 years earlier, after an overnight chimney flare scorched the upper rafters. No children were injured, but the smoke damage had rendered the corridor uninhabitable. It was sealed, stripped, and marked for eventual reconstruction. Elias had never been inside. Miss Avery carried the drawing to Miss Fielder and laid it beside the pre-fire schematic, still kept in the director's planning file. 7 beds, check. Lamp placement, correct. Door frame, center split. Even the spacing between the beds and the hallway wall aligned. The most unsettling detail was a faint brown line drawn diagonally across the 3rd cot from the end, positioned exactly where the urn. On Tuesday, the younger boys were given crayons and paper during their indoor hour due to rain. Miss Avery instructed them to draw their own dormitory, bedrows, windows, the hallway outside. The goal was to identify spatial understanding and fine motor consistency, as per the director's annual developmental review. Elias took a seat near the supply cabinet and selected 3 crayons, brown, grey, and pale blue. He worked silently for the full hour, keeping his elbows tight to the desk and turning the paper only once. When time was called, he handed in his drawing without comment. Miss Avery scanned the stack. Most were crude: boxes for beds, circular windows, stick-figure children. Elias's stood out immediately. His lines were deliberate, the proportions correct. 7 beds lined the left wall, evenly spaced. A low-burning oil lamp was sketched in the corner, and a door was drawn at the far end with a split in the center panel, accurate to the West Wing's old fire doors. Avery turned the paper over. No name. She asked Elias which room he'd drawn. He said without hesitation, "Where Abram used to sleep." "Which wing is this?" she asked. "The one with the wooden windows," he replied. "Before the fire." The West Wing had been closed 2 years earlier, after an overnight chimney flare scorched the upper rafters. No children were injured, but the smoke damage had rendered the corridor uninhabitable. It was sealed, stripped, and marked for eventual reconstruction. Elias had never been inside. Miss Avery carried the drawing to Miss Fielder and laid it beside the pre-fire schematic, still kept in the director's planning file. 7 beds, check. Lamp placement, correct. Door frame, center split. Even the spacing between the beds and the hallway wall aligned. The most unsettling detail was a faint brown line drawn diagonally across the 3rd cot from the end, positioned exactly where the fire damage had collapsed a support beam. Fielder checked Elias's file. There were no records showing he had seen blueprints. He hadn't been present during prior planning sessions, and the West Wing had remained locked since the week of his arrival. The keys were kept in the main office. Elias had never had access. She asked him again the next day, casually, during supper, what the drawing was of. He answered plainly, "Where we shared a blanket." "Who's we?" "Abram and me." "How do you know that room?" He stared at his tray. "We were there before. I just remembered." No further explanation. That night, Fielder entered the West Wing with the original schematic in hand. The air was dry, the wood split in places, the walls still blackened in a few corners. No cots remained. The room was empty except for a stack of bed frames pushed to the side, rusted at the joints. She walked to the 3rd space from the end, where Elias had drawn the diagonal line. The floor there was warped, boards slightly lifted from water damage. Above, the beam was cracked, with a char mark across the joint. She noted the location on her copy of the floor plan. On her way out, she noticed something else, etched faintly into the plaster near the door. The letters AH, scratched with the tip of a nail or pencil. Below it, a second set, EH, partially rubbed out. She didn't log the marks. Instead, she filed the drawing in the administrative archive under Miscellaneous, Art and Education. When Avery returned the drawings to the children the following week, Elias's was missing. He didn't ask for it. He didn't redraw it. But on the bottom of his new page, almost as an afterthought, he shaded a short hallway in grey. This one had only 4 beds. 3 were drawn in blue. The 4th was shaded brown and left empty. Mrs. Thalia Price arrived just before noon, travelling from the County Welfare Office to Condi, UK quarterly evaluations of the home's recent intakes. Her focus was on adjustment patterns, speech readiness, memory reliability, and signs of prior neglect. She spent no more than 20 minutes with each child, making brief observations while clerks logged the assessments. Elias was scheduled 4th. He was escorted to the East Office, small, windowed, furnished with 2 chairs and a tea table. Mrs. Price reviewed his intake summary before he entered. 8 years old, admitted mid-July, no parent contact, no known behavioral disruptions. She started the session casually, asking his name, his bed number, favorite foods. He answered with short, even replies. Clear voice, no hesitation. He didn't fidget. When she asked if he remembered where he lived before the orphanage, he responded, "The house with the orchard behind it." "What kind of orchard?" Pears, mostly. The shed always smelled like syrup. There was a yellow chair by the fence. None of this was in the intake notes. The widow who surrendered him made no mention of orchard property. Mrs. Price asked about the people in the house. Elias listed names she didn't recognize. None of them matched known caretakers. He then mentioned the tall man with the cane who gave out cough syrup. Mrs. Price assumed it was a physician and asked what year that was. Elias answered, right before Miss Holloway left. The name stopped her. Miss Holloway had been a reading instructor at the home, but she left in February of 1862. That was over 2 years ago. Elias had only just turned 8. Price asked who else he remembered. He said, the girl who kept the radio under her pillow. What was her name? He looked uncertain. Florence, maybe. She gave me a button when they took her away. Price didn't press further, but made detailed notations. When the interview ended, she returned to her desk and cross-checked names against personnel files. Holloway was listed, along with her resignation date, February 3rd, 1862. The tall man with the cane matched Dr. Levens, who had filled in for Dr. Keene. During the winter of 1861, he was known for dosing children with molasses syrup for colds. He had died of fever that same winter. The issue was timing. Elias couldn't have known any of them. He was born in January 1856. He would have been 5, still under parish supervision, not yet transferred to the home. Yet he spoke with certainty, listing staff room numbers, describing the old layout of the infirmary, including the wall cot that had been removed after flooding in early 62. Price drafted a formal note. Subject demonstrated detailed recollection of institutional staff and layout as of 1861 to 62. Descriptions accurate. Names unprompted. None appear in current records. Cross-reference with Harmon intake file recommended. Potential misdated placement or prior residence. She flagged the file for re-review and placed it in the inspector's queue. By the following morning, the folder was missing. Her assistant confirmed the queue was locked overnight. No staff had accessed the drawer. Only 3 other files had been pulled, none related to Elias Harmon. The interview notes were also gone from her clipboard. Just the intake summary remained. She contacted the director's office. The response was formal. The child had no prior record at the orphanage before July 1864. Any notes implying otherwise must be in error. No duplicate file existed. Price later found a folded piece of paper at the back of her desk drawer, unlabeled, a list of names. Some were staff, some children. All struck through except one. E. Harmon, bed 3L. Active. She didn't remember writing it, and it wasn't on her stationery. The mix-up happened on a Wednesday. Miss Laurel was covering for Miss Avery, who had fallen ill mid-week. She was handed a roster that morning, names, cots, reading levels, but it was outdated. A few children had been reassigned since summer rotation. Several names had been crossed out and rewritten by hand, including Elias Harmon's. His name was squeezed into the margin beside cot 3L. At roll call, she read the list aloud. Harmon, Abram. No one responded immediately. She repeated it. Then from the 3rd row, Elias raised his hand without hesitation. Here. She made no correction and continued. The next day, during reading practice, she handed him a worn primer labeled A.H. and instructed, Abram, begin with line 2. Again, Elias obeyed. He read the line quietly, eyes down, without protest. She marked his fluency as average. It wasn't until Friday after Miss Avery's return that the name discrepancy was flagged. Avery noticed Elias hesitated when called by name, just long enough to suggest uncertainty. She checked the roll and saw the crossed-out entry. Abram. She asked the boy directly, "What's your name?" He blinked. Elias. When the substitute called you Abram, why didn't you say anything? He shrugged. She wasn't wrong. Miss Avery logged the exchange in her daily notes as mild trauma confusion. She had seen it before, children reverting to sibling names after a loss, especially twins. It wasn't unusual, But over the weekend, another child, Thomas Kerr, was caught talking in the play yard. When asked who he was speaking to, he answered, "Abram." "There's no Abram here," the groundsman said. Thomas pointed toward the side steps. He said he came back, but they gave him Elias's bed. That same afternoon, Elias was seen sitting alone on the bench outside the laundry hall. He wore a smock labeled EH, but had drawn a small A into the dirt with his finger, circling it idly. Miss Avery met with Matron Fielder that evening to review patterns. It wasn't the name itself that disturbed her, but how fluidly the boy responded to either. "He's not slipping between names," she said. "He's accepting them both." Fielder retrieved the intake form. The signature line was still blank. The space meant for the child's own hand remained untouched since admission. Above it, the name, Elias H. Arman, was written in the clerk's print. They searched the behavior log. In 4 separate notations since arrival, the boy had been referred to as Abram by others, clerks, children, even a visiting inspector, and had never corrected it. In one instance, a night watchman wrote, "Child Harmon responded to both names when called." Fielder pulled the old discipline book, which still contained Abram's behavioral entries from before his death. One line stood out, dated January 13th, 1864. "Responded to Elias's name during music practice, claimed it was a mistake, then repeated it again on purpose." The mirror had reversed. On Monday morning, Avery distributed new seating cards with full names printed in black ink. She handed Elias his, Elias Harmon, Cot 3L. He read it once, then tucked it into his reader. During the lesson, she observed him flipping it upside down on his desk, as though testing how it looked from different angles. That night, Miss Fielder reviewed the cards after collection. Most were folded or smudged, but intact. Elias's was clean, except for a faint erasure at the top corner. Pressed into the paper with no ink, just the pressure of a nail or thumbnail, were 3 letters barely visible against the grain. A.H. There was no disciplinary action. The card was not reissued. And the next time his name was called, the boy answered before it was finished. Whether it was Elias or Abram didn't seem to matter. The request was routine. Miss Greaves had been updating the resident archive ahead of the quarterly audit and found a gap in the Harmon records. Elias's intake was accounted for, admitted July 19th, assigned to Cot 3L, age 8, no personal effects. But Abram's file, which should have been closed after his death in June, was missing from the internal ledger. Standard practice dictated that deceased resident files be moved to the sealed archive at the county recorder's office. Greaves sent a formal request by courier that afternoon, asking for the return of the original envelope. Harmon, Abram, died June 2nd, 1864, requested for verification and update. The response arrived 3 days later, delivered by hand in a cloth satchel marked from the county clerk. The envelope inside bore the correct name and intake year, but it was unsealed, unthreaded, and folded irregularly. No official stamp, no wax closure, no filing notation. Just A.H. penciled in the top corner, and a set of mismatched pages tucked inside. The top page was the most unusual, a letter written in child's hand. The lines were uneven, the letters precise but stiff. It was signed at the bottom, Elias Harmon, July 12, 1864. The date caught Greaves immediately. That was 7 days before Elias's intake. The boy was not in the home yet, at least not officially. The widow's surrender document was dated the 18th. No staff member had logged his presence before then. The letter read more like a diary note than formal documentation. Abram won't sleep in the bed they gave him. He says it's wrong now, that someone else used it. He asked me to tell the new matron to move him before next week. He thinks she'll listen more to me. Greaves turned the page over. In lighter pencil, written diagonally across the blank side, was a second sentence. "If she doesn't come yet, it means I stayed." Beneath the letter sat a single-page intake summary. It matched the institution's format: age, height, next of kin unknown, no personal items. but the staff signature was from a name not on file in 1864, W. Tavin, matron. Greaves checked the rosters. Miss Willa Tavin had joined the home on August the 3rd, 2 weeks after Elias arrived. She had never met either twin. Her signature shouldn't appear on anything related to their intake. She summoned Tavin to her office. "Do you recognize this?" Tavin examined the page, frowning. "That's my hand," she said. "But I've never signed anything for the Harmon boys. I wasn't even working here in July." "You're sure?" She nodded. "I didn't meet Elias until his 2nd month, and I've never seen Abram's file." Greaves returned to the envelope and found no folder number, no archive stamp, no date received. There was no record of it ever being stored. When she contacted the county clerk's office to confirm, they responded by telegram. "No file for Harmon Abram exists in sealed archive, no transfer logged, envelope not issued by this office." The satchel had no return label. It was placed into storage under provisional status, tagged as an unverified document, removed from active audit. That night, Greaves rechecked Elias's intake again. On the back of his official page, faintly visible under the lamplight, was an indentation from another sheet, the same looping cursive used in the note. Only 2 words were legible, pressed from the page above. "She came." The envelope was resealed, filed under administrative discrepancy number 102, and marked with red twine. No one asked Elias about the letter, and the matron's log for August 3rd was quietly amended, crossing out Tavin's name and replacing it with "assignment delayed." No reason given. The photograph was taken on August 9th, a warm, dry afternoon, designated for the orphanage's quarterly group portrait. The photographer, Mr. Callahan, had been hired by the director's office to produce a series of updated images for the county record, 1 group photo for each wing, plus 3 individual images of new intakes. Elias Harmon had not been scheduled for individual photography, but was included in the West Wing group frame. The children were arranged on the chapel steps, 4 rows, 2 standing, 2 seated. Elias was positioned in the lower right, hands folded in his lap, face turned just slightly off-center. Mr. Callahan used his standard equipment, an 8x10 bellows camera, glass plate negative, and filtered skylight. He noted no movement during exposure. The shutter held for 3 full seconds. 3 days later, the plates were developed in his workshop outside Shelbyville. 5 negatives were clean. 2 had minor light bleed at the edges. 1, the West Wing group photo, produced an irregularity. In the developed image, Elias sat exactly where he had during the session, but to his immediate right, separated by no more than 8 inches, was a faint silhouette. The shape was human, same posture, same scale. Its outline mimicked Elias's precisely, down to the position of the hands and the slight turn of the head. It lacked detail, no eyes, no hair, no shading in the face, just a soft form in negative tone, like an underexposed double. No other child had such a shadow. No other plate showed similar distortion. Callahan cleaned the lens, checked for chemical contamination, then reviewed his exposure notes. There had been no second frame taken. The glass plate showed no evidence of reuse. He printed a single copy and delivered it to the orphanage as part of his standard submission. Miss Fielder reviewed the photos one by one, stopping at the West Wing group. "What's this?" she asked, pointing at the silhouette. Callahan leaned over. "I can't explain that," he said. "No movement, no retake. I kept the original plate. You're welcome to inspect it." She brought the image to the director. His response was brief. "Destroy the original. Do not reprint it." Fielder handed the photo back without logging it into the image ledger. It was placed in an envelope marked defective and sent to the furnace behind the laundry hall. But Callahan did not destroy the plate. He kept it in a cloth wrap beneath his counter, filed under anomalies, not because he suspected fraud or fault, but because the exposure hadn't behaved like an error. The silhouette wasn't a blur or a streak. It was deliberate in shape, anchored to the space beside the boy. It did not appear in the background. It cast no reflection on nearby subjects, but it belonged in the image. The next week, Callahan returned to the orphanage to deliver a corrected copy. Elias shifted left. Another boy added to balance the row. Before leaving, he passed Elias near the chapel steps. The boy looked at him briefly, then at the satchel in Callahan's hand. "That's the picture where he was beside me," he said. Callahan froze. "Who?" The boy glanced at the bench. "Abram." He walked away without another word. Callahan said nothing to the staff, but when he reached home, he placed the original plate in a separate box, lined with muslin, and labeled the edge. Harmon, 2 figures, not retouched. Years later, when his shop burned in a chimney flare, the storage box was among the few things untouched by ash. The label was still legible, the plate unbroken. Inside the soot-lined lid, someone had scratched 3 small letters in the wood grain. A.H., not by Callahan's hand. The lid had never been opened since he sealed it. The breakdown happened during night rotation. Nurse Marjorie Bell, a steady figure at the orphanage since the early 50s, had been on shift for 17 straight evenings, tending to cots, dispensing syrup, logging cough counts, and reporting fever spikes. She was known for her consistency, quiet, methodical. She didn't speak unless asked, and when she did, it was always precise. At 1:12 a.m., she entered the supervisor's office unprompted, eyes red-rimmed, fingers clasped tightly. She stood without speaking until Mr. Ingram, the night supervisor, looked up. "I buried the wrong one," she said. He set his pencil down. "What's that?" "I buried Elias," she repeated. "Not Abram. I signed it wrong." Ingram opened the logbook, flipping to the June burial release. A single entry marked the death of Abram Harmon, dated June 2nd, 1864. Signature, M. Bell. Confirmed by staff witness Fielder, initials recorded in the adjacent column. "Marjorie," Ingram said slowly, "you signed off on Abram's death." "I remember him in the blanket," she said, "not Elias. Abram had the thinner shoulders. Elias always curled forward. It wasn't Elias in that cot. It was him I prepped. That's who we buried." Ingram retrieved the file. The documentation was straightforward. Name, Abram Harmon. Time of death, 3:40 a.m. Cause, pulmonary fever. Released for burial, 9:10 a.m. Prepared by Bell M. Witnessed, Fielder M. Marjorie stared at the form, then at the name at the top. "That's not the one I saw on the tag." Ingram paused. "You're saying the wrong twin was recorded as deceased?" She didn't answer, just kept standing, hands shaking now. He filed a temporary notice of psychological fatigue and placed her on leave the following morning. She didn't resist. When she packed her things, she left behind her pin, her ledger pouch, and her watch, the one she used to time breathing checks. The burial release form was pulled from the clerk's stack that same afternoon for audit review. It was logged in the discrepancy folder. Director Hawthorne ordered a follow-up signature review and handwriting comparison. 3 days later, the form disappeared. The discrepancy folder was intact, contents accounted for, each item numbered and checked. But number 9, the Harmon release sheet, was gone. The clerk who filed it claimed no recollection of pulling it. A spare index card was left in its place, blank except for the number 9 written in red ink. The main archive was searched. Nothing. Ingram requested the burial witness ledger instead, an older volume kept by Fielder in her locked drawer, used to record bedside deaths, dates and brief summaries. He found the Harmon entry halfway down a page marked June 6th. Boy deceased before light. Cot 3R. Skin cool. No struggle. Prepared without incident. Identified by tag stitched EH. Ingram blinked. He flipped the page back. The previous entry, May 30th, was for an unrelated child. The ink was identical. The tag note was underlined. He showed the page to Fielder. "I didn't write that," she said, "but you initialed it." Her initials were there. MF, written beside the note. She stared at them. "That's my hand," she said, quieter now. "But that's not what I wrote. He had an A tag. We verified it." Ingram sealed the witness ledger and transferred it to the administrative review bin. That evening, a new linen delivery arrived from the county mill. 30 blankets, each with sewn initials, awaiting assignment. Among them, folded neatly near the top, was one marked in identical grey thread. Staff assumed it was meant for Elias and placed it at the foot of cot 3L. The next morning, when Fielder checked the cot, the tag was gone. Torn cleanly from the seam, the blanket was still there. But folded, not the way Staff did it, the way Marjorie Bell had done it. Top down, corners tight, nothing sticking out. On August the 16th, a visitor arrived at the front gate just after lunch. He was middle-aged, travelling on foot, his trousers dusted with clay, a folded cap in hand. He introduced himself only as Mr. Penley, and stated plainly that he had come to speak with Abram Harmon. The front clerk, Miss Vale, corrected him. "We have an Elias Harmon. Abram passed in June." Penley paused. "No, ma'am," he said. "It was Abram I saw, not a month ago, just south of Tipton Ridge." She summoned Director Hawthorne, who met the man in his office. Penley sat without prompting, holding an envelope addressed in firm block script. To A. Harmon, Orphanage Home, Cot 3R. No return name, no county stamp. Hawthorne read it over and pushed it aside. Abram Harmon died in this institution on June 2nd. His twin, Elias, remains under care. Penley leaned forward. "I saw the boy in Tipton Ridge, just past the tobacco shop. He crossed the square alone, had a scar just under the shoulder blade, left side, walked with one hand pressed to it like it hurt." The director stiffened. "How close were you?" 10 feet, Penley replied. "Close enough to know he didn't recognize me. But I knew him. I worked the supply kitchen here last winter. Abram used to scrape trays." Hawthorne opened the intake file and slid it forward. "This is the child we have, Elias Harmon." Penley studied the photograph clipped to the corner. He nodded slowly. "That's him, yes, but that's also who I saw." "They're the same." Penley didn't respond. The envelope remained sealed. Hawthorne requested to open it, but Penley declined. "It's not mine to open," he said. "He'll know what it's about." Hawthorne escorted him to the hall and had Vale prepare a visitor refusal slip. As Penley left, he turned back once, nodding toward the courtyard. "If you're wrong," he said, "that boy's still walking in someone else's shoes." After the man departed, the director examined the envelope again. The ink was smudged at the corners but fresh. It had no postage, no sender, no indication of where it had come from. Just the line, Cot 3R. Cot 3R had never been reassigned. Fielder confirmed the room had remained sealed since spring. The linen assignments had only extended to 3L. Still, Hawthorne brought Elias to the office later that afternoon. He asked him calmly, "Do you know a man named Penley?" Elias looked down. "He used to give us eggs from the back gate." "Us?" The boy said nothing. "Did you leave the home last month, Elias?" "No." "Did you go near Tipton Ridge?" "I don't know where that is." Hawthorne placed the envelope on the desk. "This was brought for your brother. Do you know what it is?" Elias stared at it, then whispered, "It's his list." "What list?" "He wrote it before we came, for what we'd need to remember if we ever had to trade places." Hawthorne said nothing. The envelope remained sealed. That night, Vale filed the visitor refusal slip under general inquiries, denied. The envelope was stored in the administrative cabinet, labeled non-deliverable. The next morning, it was gone. In its place was a blank envelope, same size, same fold, addressed only with 3 letters, EH. No one admitted to the swap. No one saw who filed it. But on the morning duty chart, scribbled faintly in the margin beside bed 3L, was a note in unfamiliar handwriting, "Left shoulder, matches." The note was found by accident during a supply rotation behind the infirmary. Nurse Keene, reaching behind the base of the medicine cabinet to retrieve a fallen thermometer sleeve, noticed the edge of a folded paper wedged between the floorboard and the wall trim. It had yellowed from time, corners curled, one edge singed slightly. She turned it in to Matron Fielder, who laid it flat on her desk blotter and opened it carefully. The paper had no seal, no formal heading, just a single line at the top, written in light pencil, to whichever one is left. Beneath it was a short message in uneven cursive, slanted hard to the right. "You can keep the room if you want. I don't think I'll come back to it. Just don't sleep on the side near the door. It's too loud there. The blanket is still mine though. You can use it, but don't wash it." Then, at the bottom of the page, 2 names. Abram, Elias. Both names were written in the same childlike script, but the pressure was different. The loops in the A and E slightly sharper in one. The spacing varied, Abram's signature tight, with a heavy downward press. Elias's stretched, uneven, lighter to the touch. Fielder logged the letter under unclassified findings and sent a copy to Dr. Corwin, who maintained the handwriting analysis ledger for student evaluations. He spent the evening comparing the signatures to known samples. The conclusion was strange, but clear. The 2 signatures are consistent with being written by the same individual. However, the pressure index and arc rhythm suggest they were written approximately 10 to 14 months apart. This is not unusual in developing children. What is unusual is that both signatures match only one known hand. The known hand was Elias's. Abram's handwriting, what little had been preserved, didn't match either signature. Fielder reviewed the source materials. Abram had only one surviving writing sample in the archive, a discipline note scrawled during a literacy exercise. His script was blocky, printed, not cursive. The slant of his letters leaned slightly left, not right. Yet this note, clearly marked with both names, had 2 versions of the same hand, neither of which matched Abram's known writing. Worse still, the note's date was indeterminate. The paper stock had no watermark. The pencil was a common graphite blend used throughout the home, but tucked into the fold, pressed faintly in the corner, was a dry wax seal from the old pantry, one that hadn't been used since the building was remodeled in early 1863. That pantry had been part of the West Wing, the same wing that burned. Fielder showed the letter to Elias 2 days later. She asked where it came from. He read it without emotion, then said, "We wrote it just in case." "In case of what?" "In case we had to split." "Did you write both names?" He looked at the paper again. "I don't remember." "Do you recognize the handwriting?" He nodded. "It's mine, but I don't think I was there when he signed it." That afternoon, the letter was placed in an internal evidence envelope, folded once more, and filed in the locked drawer beneath the attendance ledger. A note was added to its listing. Twin signature letter, authorship unclear. Recovered behind closed section of infirmary wall. Retain indefinitely. That same night, Nurse Keene returned to the infirmary to finish restocking. When she opened the cabinet where the paper had fallen, she found the bottom drawer slightly ajar. Inside was a wool blanket, folded, marked faintly in red thread with the initials A.H. The stitching was recent, the thread was clean, but the cloth smelled faintly of smoke. The inventory sheet still listed it as destroyed in the West Wing fire. The decision came from the director's office on September the 1st, following a closed-door meeting between Director Hawthorne, Matron Fielder, Dr. Corwin, and Miss Greaves. Over the past 2 months, the Harmon entries, both Elias and Abram, had generated a pattern of inconsistencies that could no longer be corrected through marginal notations or reissued forms. A list of discrepancies was compiled and attached to the final report. Dual dental charts, mismatched dates, scar unlisted in original medical file, signature anomalies in the infirmary letter, linen tags bearing both sets of initials, conflicting witness statements on burial identity, a visitor file logged to a deceased twin, an intake letter signed before the official admission date. Miss Greaves presented the last complication. Both files had now been amended by no fewer than 4 separate staff members, with changes made outside approved procedures. Several changes bore initials that did not match any current or former employee. A few entries were written in the wrong ink stock, ink that had been discontinued the previous year. "There is no administratively sound version of this child's record," she said. "We can't verify which boy he is." Rather than continue retroactive corrections, the director signed a final resolution. Archive and seal both Harmon files. Create a new record under third intake designation, neutral identity. The new file was handwritten by Matron Fielder that afternoon. Name, H. Elias. The letter H was never explained. It appeared only once before, on an unsigned linen tag mislogged during August rotation. No first name, no surname, no twin reference. New date of admission, September 3rd, 1864. Bed assignment, Cot 3L. Previous records, sealed and removed from open access. Behavioral notes, quiet, consistent attendance, no disciplinary action, non-verbal. The directive went into effect immediately. Instructors were told to update rosters. Meal logs replaced the Harmon name with the new entry. Linen tags were laundered again, initials removed where possible. Even his file slot was moved, relocated 2 drawers lower, beneath the children whose surnames began with G. That week, Miss Avery updated her class chart. She asked the boy to write his new name on a card. He picked up the chalk and pressed it gently to the slate, but no letter formed. He set the chalk down and folded his hands. When asked again, he did not respond. He did not speak for the rest of the day, nor the day after. By the second week, no one asked him to say his name aloud. He continued attending classes, meals, and rest periods. He followed instructions. He passed written lessons, but when spoken to, he answered only with nods or eye contact. On September 11th, Nurse Keene performed a routine check on Cot 3L. She found the boy asleep, blanket drawn to his chin. The corner tag had been removed. In its place, stitched roughly by hand in uneven thread, was a new identifier. Number 43. This one. She asked who had done it. No other child admitted to it. The sewing needle from the linen drawer had gone missing. It was later found behind the cot, stuck into the wood paneling beneath the mattress. The blanket was left unchanged. No further annotations were made to the new file until spring. By year's end, the entry for H. Elias contained only 4 lines. No incidents, no name corrections, no speech notes, no aliases. In the comments section at the bottom of the page, someone had written in pencil, likely months later, "Not sure when this one came in, but he's been here longer than that." The handwriting did not match Fielder's, nor Corwin's, nor any clerk on staff, and in the top ray,